Nice cold 15-degree Pennsylvania day. We've had snow on the ground for over a month, and so I want to cut some trees down today to accomplish two things. One is just the deer need food, and the deer aren't the only thing, but the deer are going to have a hard time getting their food. It's important to remember deer are browsers. So browse is the ends of the tree branches. They want the buds, and much of the forest, much of the buds are up there in the canopy. So by cutting some trees down at this time of the year, you're providing food for the deer in the form of browse. The other thing I'm trying to accomplish is, behind me is a pretty good matrix of the age I want to see on my land. I want to see some older trees. I want to see some really young trees. I want to see some medium age pole timber, as it's called. That's kind of my goal. I'm going to turn the camera around in a second and show you behind the camera. This is not ideal at all. In fact, I'll spin it this way. Here's an area that was logged about 15 or 20 years ago. They came through and clear cut this pretty thick, and not surprisingly what you have is a burst of young growth. But this isn't going to work. I mean, long term, you can't have this many trees grow up mature. There's simply not enough sunlight. That's the limiting factor. It's, trees eat sun, for lack of a better word, and so they need enough sunlight for their canopy to spread out and for them to thrive. So it will actually benefit this stand of timber in the long run for me to come in here and cut out a couple trees. Now what I try to do is, like, I look for subtle flaws. Okay, so like this tree here with a little bit of a curve, might as well take that one. There's a straight one next to it I'm going to let go. Could use a chainsaw, but it's not as much fun. The other thing I'm taking into account is the species. So I have a ton of these tulip poplars coming up in here, and that's a very useful tree, but I like diversity. Right here I got a birch, sweet birch, so I'm going to let that birch go because I don't have a ton of birch in this particular spot. And I'm going to pick this guy out, take him down. Another thing to look for is clusters like this. So there obviously used to be a stump here, but now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 trees coming out of the same stump. That's not going to work in the long run. So I'll pick this guy and fell him out. So last week I came in and cut a bunch of these down, and let's just see if the deer have been eating them. This is a birch, and the buds are all nipped off. Pretty cool. So it works. The deer are coming in, and this is what's going to keep them alive this winter. All bit off. So accomplishing two things at once here today. Thinning out the, this is way too thick a growth. So I'm thinning that out, but I'm doing it intentionally in February so that I'm feeding the deer, and it's kind of a win-win. Pretty spot out here. I love it. We're actually on a grounds that used to be charcoal grounds for the Liberty Furnace. So men and boys worked out here cutting trees and turning it into charcoal. And on all of Montour Ridge, I've only found, I think it's 7 collier huts, the homes they lived in. And I know it's snow covered, but the mound you see behind me is one of them. So that's where the colliers lived. That's where they slept, well, a few hours they slept. But what's cool, so there's their hut, right? I found this depression a couple months ago. Turn the camera around. Got a hole in the ground here, which is pretty unnatural. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm walking down in a hole. And you're not going to be able to see it, but I bet you'll be able to hear it. It's 15 degrees today. Listen to this. So obviously there's a spring down there. So what I think the colliers did is they dug this area. It's all stone here, but they lifted all the stone out and they made a little water access point. It's 15 degrees and there's water flowing in there, so that's pretty good groundwater. And they had water, they had shelter, and this would have been their office. Pretty beautiful, huh? So I got Montour Ridge behind me and some of the little side mountains that flank Montour Ridge here. In the gap over there is where the iron ore was mined, but the charcoal lands that fueled the furnace were all up here. So it's kind of fun to come out here with an axe and do the same kind of work these colliers did 150, 170 years ago. Get you a better look at this collier's hut. So it's just a big mound now, right? But this would have been their shelter. Kind of like a giant, sort of like a teepee that's covered in soil. And something's been digging over here. The deer. Well, I got to take this chance to show off my little getaway. My sons and I built this a couple years ago, and it's the bunkhouse. Give you a little tour. So when the fancy life of Danville gets to be too much for me, I come out here. These are our 1940 U.S. Army surplus, so pre-World War II. You got a little bunk bed up there. Give you a tour. Great place to sleep. You hear that creak? Ooh, something else just caught my eye, and that's a habitat tree. I got a dead ash here, and if you look up there's a cavity forming. There's a hole in the tree. From a timber value point of view, that's a worthless tree. But from a wildlife value, that's a very valuable tree. If it were bigger, it'd be even more valuable. But that cavity is habitat for something. Something can live in there. If it were a little bigger, we could even luck out and get wood ducks this close to water. But something that small, it could just be some cavity nester, smaller bird. But so another thing to be watching when you're cutting firewood trees, like is basically what I was doing today, just dropping non-valuable trees. Don't neglect to preserve a couple of those big dead trees that can hollow out. Really valuable for wildlife. So this is pretty cool. I looked out my window this morning and I saw he's either a very big fox or a coyote. running around out here. He was actually having a lot of fun. He was running up and down the hill, and I couldn't find a second one, but the way he was acting, it was like he was playing with a friend. But these are my deer carcasses. When I'm done butchering in the fall, after I shoot a deer, I usually dump the carcass out here. And I know it might be kind of gross, but look at all the footprints of critters. Let's see if we can get you something up close. So somebody has been working on this. So it's not just about feeding the deer. I realize we humans love to pick favorites in our wildlife species, but who are we to say whether or not a deer is more important than a coyote? I know some of you would disagree, but I love all critters. I really do. And you might think I'm nuts to be feeding predators, but I've been doing it for a couple decades, and I have not seen it come back to haunt me. I have plenty of deer here, especially if I do things like I did today, make sure they have enough food and stuff. All right, here's some cool tracks. I would say that's crow, so even the crows are coming in and getting some food. And I'll see if I can get you an up-close one of the... I've always found it odd. The deer will walk right by the site and not even... It doesn't even... Like you'd think they'd get smells or something, but nope, not at all. These little guys, they look fox-like. Fox. Let's see if I can find you one of the bigger ones from this morning that I think is the coyote. Actually, what was interesting is their footprints were right in my old footprints. They're smart. They don't want to do any more work than they have to. Oh, hey, before I leave the site, so this is a Virginia pine. For deer, this is actually some of the lowest quality food there is out there. But last week I saw deer eating hemlock and Virginia pine. When you see deer browsing on evergreens, that is a sign that they are really hurting for food. You know, it's like it's their last go-to food when they are hungry, because there's just so little nutrition in it. So something to be looking for. And even if you don't see the deer doing it, like look at these guys ahead of me. See how they're all browsed up to about 4 feet off the ground? That's deer. That's deer. Same with the guy behind me. Pretty much all needles from 4 feet down are gone. So when you're seeing evidence like that, your deer are hungry. And I should say there's different opinions on this, but there's a lot of evidence that feeding deer corn and grain like that in the middle of winter is actually a bad thing. So I don't advise doing it. There's different opinions on it, but basically in a nutshell, a deer can eat corn and soybean and all those things in the fall and even in the summer, but in the winter months, when their digestive tract has switched over to eating nothing but browse, the chemical reactions that are taking place in their stomachs and in their digestive tracts, it's very acidic and specific to that woody vegetation. And when all of a sudden they get a bunch of corn and those types of foods, it can actually create like an acid shock and kill them. So the question is, does that happen all the time, some of the time? I don't know, but it's been documented. And so therefore, plus you look at it from a natural point of view, there's really no natural explanation for why 50 pounds of corn would just drop out of the sky in the forest. Whereas, would a tree come down in an ice storm or in a windstorm? Absolutely. So what I'm doing today and dropping trees so they can get their browse, that's normal. That's from an evolutionary point of view. But a pile of corn, I advise against it in the winter. I know your heart's in the right place, but I've seen enough evidence to think it's bad. All right, here's some cool. I'll put my boot next to it so you can get an idea of the size. I'd say that could be coyote. Like I said, he was either a real big fox or a smaller coyote, but we got tracks galore through here. You can see which way he was going.